Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Mountain Rose Herbs. The folks at Mountain Rose Herbs are committed to providing us herbalists with high-quality, organic, and sustainable herbs, spices, essential oils, bulk ingredients, and much more. But quality isn't the only thing they're passionate about. They consider the environmental and social impact of every business decision they make, and are dedicated to keeping their business practices sustainable and ethical from start to finish. To Mountain Rose Herbs, people, plants, and planet are more important than profit. And Herb Rally podcast listeners can get 15% off their order at mountainroseherbs.com using coupon code 22RALLY15. That's 22RALLY15, all one word. So a huge thanks to Mountain Rose Herbs for sponsoring the podcast, and don't forget to use coupon code 22RALLY15 to get 15% off your next order. Now on to the show. Enjoy. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. The content in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to cure, diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. This information has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. We are not doctors, nor do we play one on the internet. Please seek advice from a qualified healthcare professional. Okay, MC Calico, take it away.
Yeah. Smoking herbal blends. We need some Mullen and some Kush, my brethren. While listening to Herb Rally podcast again. Herbalism at its finest with Mason Hutchinson. Yeah.
All right, tooth and mouth pain. Tooth and mouth pain. I might do a whole presentation on this at another point soon. But let's do the basics. Various remedies. Two of the most versatile are clove. Or a few of the most versatile are clove. Clove is a great numbing agent. And it's also antimicrobial and astringent. I have made a couple of, long-term friends by offering clove during toothaches, during really acute toothaches. And people might ask, like, oh, do you use the essential oil? Well, you could do that. That's okay. But the thing about clove is it works just as well if you just use a little bit of the tincture, which you can make yourself from just clove spice and a little splash of alcohol. Or vinegar or glycerin, or you could make a strong decoction of a small, strong decoction. And it also works just as well if you put the clove bud in your mouth. Usually it's the back of our mouth where we are more often having tooth and mouth pain. Works so well. But what else? We also, in reducing infection, can use berberine plants, golden seal, although more ecological would be Oregon grapefruit, Baptisia tinctoria, or barberry. Those are all really rich in the constituent berberine that is really highly antimicrobial, said to be a mucosal membrane tonic. And I have avoided any kind of dental surgeries, extractions, etc., even after having some little acute episodes. If ever I have something that's sort of worrisome or acutely painful, I'm, using berberine plants or roots of berberine plants quite, often throughout the day. And I find it really brings down swelling and pain because if you can reduce infection, you can also reduce the sort of irritation, the swelling, etc. And then yarrow and echinacea are some sidekicks. Not quite as strong for tooth and mouth pain as the other two, but some good sidekicks to know that are antiseptic, antimicrobial, perhaps, are a little stimulating, especially the echinacea, and create a little bit of counter-irritant positive effects against pain. Scrapes, cuts, and punctures. All right, so I've defined these. Scrapes are superficial. We knew that. And then you're just, this is pretty easy. Disinfection and protection are top priorities. Cuts. If it's a little bit deeper and if it's narrow, you want to irrigate. And that means a little bit of, either water pressure or a sort of, some intentional rinsing and volume of water, and really pay some attention to let any debris, dirt, bacteria really be irrigated, washed from the area. And then you want to put the tissue back in good order, whether that is with bandages or for some, may need stitches ultimately. Use a strong disinfectant before you've bandaged it, irrigate and use a strong disinfectant before you've all bandaged it up. And preferably use one that doesn't inhibit, later on, switch to things that don't inhibit healing. In other words, there's some wisdom and knowledge that alcohol-based preparations can inhibit healing. Well, that's true, but if that is what you have at the instance of the, incident, you want to first just eliminate any bacteria that has come into that cut, and then you can sort of pull that back for other sort of topical antiseptics. In other words, just washing the wound out in the initial time is sort of the one-time event, and you can worry about what's going to promote healing more so, later on once you've changed the dressing, etc. Puncture or other cuts that are deeper than are wide. Again, the conventional wisdom is to avoid comfrey, but you do want to kind of follow the same procedure as for cuts. So here you can employ, whether we've got cuts or scrapes or any of these, you can employ tannic-rich herbs. Yarrow, geranium, oak, shepherd's purse, and more. Antimicrobial herbs, starting to repeat a lot. Berberines, such as golden seal, Oregon, grapefruit, barberry, baptisia, tinctoria, which is also called wild indigo. But really, there's such a wide variety of antimicrobial herbs. Use what you have. What about staph infection? So this is kind of the shining moment for anyone who has studied with Seven Song, where students actually travel to a big event and do first aid on people who need the first aid. And because it is a big event, and because there's mud and water and barefootness, staph infection happens. And also because it's the summer. So staph infection happens. So with staph infection, I have borrowed here some diagrams of staph infection. You can see the pus and the sort of swollen, infected, raised area and the redness. And I have borrowed a little diagram. I think this is from Where There Is No Doctor, this diagram, of doing an activated charcoal poultice, which is a practice I've done many dozens of times. All right, so what are you going to do if there's staph infection? First of all, how do you even know that it's that? A couple things. You can see scabs that really slough off or they seem like they're just sort of floating on top of a little foam ocean of pus, and they just sort of seem to come off every single day. I don't want people to be alarmed that their scab that they've picked at or that has come off is staph infection. It's really pretty remarkable how much the scab is sort of detached or not nicely attached to the skin around it, or how easily they come off day after day. You can also see black or like super white pus. And also you see that if someone has staph, they might have other cuts around that are just super minor things that don't heal. So in other words, things that like a little cut that you might otherwise not notice because it heals the next day or overnight is not healing and maybe presents with some of the signs that I've described already. So this can be it can become serious. And so what you want to do is, if someone can get to more advanced assessment and antibiotics, that can be a good way to go. But you also want to be really scrupulous with your wound dressing changing and your antimicrobial applications, whether that's conventional or herbal. So lots of repetition in these antimicrobial herbs: yarrow, golden seal, barberry, baptisia, Oregon grapefruit, propolis, and myrrh also. Because you're seeing a wound that's really flimsy, or sort of the covering mechanisms or defense is really flimsy, here's where you can do first lots of washing, and you are going to actually remove the scab. Pretty yucky. It's not exactly the relaxing, uplifting webinar that maybe everybody expects. And then you want to apply antimicrobials, and you can apply some resinous stuff like propolis or myrrh that's going to provide a little bit of protection from other bacteria or just organic debris coming into the exposed area. You want a balance of antimicrobial properties and also vulneraries, things that are going to promote healing. And you also want to, not be so aggressive to kill vulnerable tissue with a lot of alcohol, but you want to really change dressings often. So once you've done all those things, you can then apply a activated charcoal poultice. Some might do clay, but I would really use activated charcoal. I think it's a little bit more inert. In other words, not as likely to kind of harbor the bacteria. You just mix some activated charcoal with a little water. It doesn't take much water. Again, I always say we're going for tempera paint consistency. That's sort of how I saw it and described it. And then you fold this into many layers of gauze, and you dress the wound with that, and then cover and tape it and change it several times a day. Oh, good. I've described a little bit more what it looks like, and I won't repeat the parts I've already said, but we'll see if we have anything to add. So it's very contagious because it can become a systematic infection. It can exist apart from human skin, like on mats in mud, etc. You should advise anyone who has this to use antibiotics if it doesn't resolve soon. While you're helping someone, you should have on gloves. You should use a washing station for the person with the staff, and or actually ideally a separate one for anyone with staff, and then a separate one for anyone who does not have staff who is helping them or coming for other general first aid. All right, pausing to see if anyone's needs to read, but it looks like I've mentioned most of the other points on there. What about animal bites? So animal bites. This could be dog, cat, human, snake, spider. Treat quickly and with care. Sometimes people are very fearful after being bitten by something. Also, there's oropharyngeal flora. That's a funny way of saying mouth bacteria that you want to be, you want to take a little extra care with any bite originated wounds. I came up with a very silly, many years ago, what is it called? Acronym? I don't know. Mnemonic for animal bites. And it's like an A, E, I, O, U, sometimes Y. Address the symptoms. Is there bleeding? Is there extreme pain? Are they frightened? Ask about any remarkable. Ask about their medical history to get anything remarkable or relevant, such as, do they have a bleeding disorder, or do they have any sort of anaphylactic incidents in their history, that sort of thing. Do they have a disease that is transmitted through bodily fluid exposure? These are things you want to try to find out. Find out more about the animal that bit the person, or the person that bit the person, to see if this person could be doing harm to others, especially if you are in a kind of a group type setting. You want to examine the wound with wearing gloves while washing and inspecting it. How deep is the damage? Does it go to the muscle or nerve or bone? You might need to get a little bit intimate with the damaged or detached tissue to remove any mouth parts, dirt, etc. Or have someone who's, mentally, psychologically equipped to do that, do that. You want to often kind of keep the person distracted while you do this. Irrigate with water pressure. How are you going to do that? So there are irrigation syringes. There's no needle in that. It basically looks like a play syringe and squirts water through it by pressing on a plunger. Or you can improvise, water bottles, if clean, Ziploc bags with the corner cut out of them can do it. There are many ways to accomplish this, or just simply running water. Let's not get too crazy, folks, but you might not have running water, so there's some alternates. You want to follow up with an antimicrobial wash, herbal or otherwise, any kind of antiseptic. Now, when a person has been bit by something or someone, it's not only about the wound. Well, it is about the wound, but you might also offer some immune stimulants or antimicrobials orally. And it's not a bad idea for them to continue this for a few days and to continue it every few hours.
Pardon the interruption. The show will be back on shortly. People will sometimes say, Mason, how can I support you in your work? There's so much free content on Herb Rally, and it'd be nice to give back somehow. I used to say, please rank and review the show. It means the world to us, which is still great. Please rank and review in your podcast player of choice. But now I'd say becoming an Herb Rally Schoolhouse member is one of the best ways you can support our small family herbal business. If you've ever heard of Patreon, it's kind of like that. Basically, you're directly supporting our work by spending $10 a month and becoming a member of the Herb Rally Schoolhouse, or patron, if you will. Membership includes exclusive content, and we release new content each week. And the library of available content just keeps growing over time with a variety of teachers and classes, which means the schoolhouse just keeps offering more, adding more value to you as you continue on your herbalist journey. There's also a bunch of discounts for cool herbal businesses in there as well, plus some other features to the membership. So if you'd like to check it out and get your first 30 days for free, you can use coupon code PODCAST when you register at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. Again, that's herbrally.com/schoolhouse and use coupon code PODCAST at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. Thanks so much for your time and support. Now back to the show.
Some might be saying, well, what do you mean by that? So maybe some echinacea, maybe some berberis, Oregon grapefruit, andrographis, you name it, your sort of immune stimulant and or antimicrobial specifically. You want to observe the person as far as swelling. Has that begun? Consider that, if there was a lot of force during this bite, like a dog bite, or if it's something sort of venomous, then there might be some swelling you want to consider when wrapping their wound so as not to wrap them too tight. You might also consider that, being able to check on the wound several hours after and not doing sort of a bomb-proof bandage. Take a look at the person's cleanliness and environment. Depending on that, you might wrap a little bit more securely or a little bit more lightly. U is for unwrap the wounds periodically if they're covered. Soak up to 20 minutes in warm, clean, hot water or herbal baths. Air dry as thoroughly as possible, and consider a charcoal poultice. You can if you do any kind of poulticing, you want to replace that at least twice daily. Not once daily, but at least twice daily. So they're going to be getting some kind of care 2 or 3 times daily or more. And then Y was for yo, following up with the person. Like, how are they doing emotionally? How are they doing physically? All right, a little more narrative here. You want to look for signs of systemic infection, which could be fever or a lot of tenderness near the affected area. You could see headaches, fatigue, or red or blue or unusual color that travels from the area of the wound, up or down their limb or body. And these are all things that really are of pretty immediate concern. should be treated, monitored professionally, that is, in an advanced medical setting where their vitals can be monitored, where antibiotics can be administered, not just orally, but perhaps, intravenously if needed, etc. All right, so here's another bummer. Tick bites and bullseye rashes. Tick bites and bullseye rashes require attention. I wrote now that Lyme disease is as prevalent as it is, although this was probably more than 10 years ago, 15 maybe, that I wrote that. You want to get all the mouth parts, all sort of bug and body parts, so irrigate a lot. Use antiseptics, use drying agents. Seek testing if possible. And for tick bites and bullseye rashes, both strong antimicrobials and strong potentially anti-spirochetal or anti-spirochete herbs. So what would that be? Two possibilities to use following tick bites are Andrographis and Artemisia annua. You don't need both. One or the other is great. Artemisia annua and farmlands or sort of some maybe prairie lands could be escaped and common. Andrographis, to my knowledge, is more of an Indian herb, and you might be finding or carrying that more sort of from the, if you're in the West, from the sort of supplement aisle standpoint. And you might use the Andrographis if you're in the West. It's going to be more common to find it as like a capsule or a sort of oral supplement. And so that might be something you take internally. The Artemisia annua might be something that you can use in a sort of wash that you have made yourself. Both of these have some use against some of the tougher diseases like malaria and the sort of more complex pathogens as such, and have current use, hopeful use, with or against Lyme disease, though we know there isn't exactly a cure. With those, you're looking to kind of prevent the possibility of co-infections, perhaps reduce possibility of or extent of an infection. Okay, so what about food and waterborne illnesses, vomiting, and so on? We can do some, we are more than halfway through by far. We're most of the way through. Vomiting, food and waterborne illnesses. Sometimes purgatives could be the called for, but it really depends. So there's some wisdom you should know if someone has ingested anything caustic. You don't want to use purgatives. If it's more along the lines of sort of like a poisonous plant or, food or water with bacteria, then a purgative or, if they are vomiting, that can be a positive. You want to really keep an eye on hydration and sort of, in most cases, do adequate hydration. Antimicrobials early on can be helpful, even before early signs of illness. Anti-nauseants are going to be super, super convenient if you have like your peppermint or ginger, for example. Astringents, blackberry root, yarrow, and geranium can help to reduce dehydration. And some of the most potent GI antimicrobials include grapefruit seed extract. I'm not big on it as sort of a habit or regular practice, but let's say someone has been exposed to some giardia or something of that nature, then using it as directed can perhaps save them some trouble and harm and, reduce the impact. Also, golden seal and other berberines are possibilities. Usnea, I don't think we mentioned usnea yet, but usnea lichen infusion in small amounts. I say small amounts only because it could be a little bit nauseating in larger amounts. And also lomatium and osha. And I guess I mentioned usnea because if you know Usnea barbata, if you can identify it, then you might be able to find a little bit in the wild, and you actually don't need a great deal of it either. Okay, so now let's move into drawing agents and purgatives from, if we're including the kind of internal use. The first two would also apply to topical use, but we've really covered topical stuff. So drawing agents and purgatives for internal use. Activated charcoal, excellent. You can use it as capsules or as powder. Exact amount, not critical, truly. This is sort of a finer particle charcoal product that absorbs things in the GI tract. So that includes toxins, bacteria, fine substances in the gut. It also will attach to and draw out some nutrients. So that's the bummer about it. The idea is to sort of use it, use it as much as possible after the initial sort of ingestion or exposure to a food or waterborne illness, and then to use it after that pretty regularly, like in between meals if you can, in order to kind of reduce the impact it has on absorbing nutrients as well. It is much, much, much safer than Ipecac, okay? And it can be used after vomiting from Ipecac if that's something that is done, or if someone has thrown up from just being, naturally sick from their illness. Yes. So bentonite clay, if you have food grade, also can be used similarly to activated charcoal. The charcoal is really my favorite. Some sources say this disperses bacteria. I'm not really sure, but I've stuck with mostly activated charcoal as an approach. And then Ipecac syrup, this one's a little more controversial. This is not Ipecac extract, which is super strong. It's not the elixir, which are 14 times more concentrated. Only use the syrup type preparations, and then use sort of as it's labeled, which is typically, I think, like 1 or 2 small amounts, in the range of teaspoons for children to tablespoons for adults. Read the label for contraindications. Ipecac is not recommended for all sorts of poisonings. You never induce vomiting if you don't know what they've swallowed, if they are confused or groggy, if it's a child 2 years or younger who isn't going to understand what is happening, and also there's some other potential areas of harm there, or potential causes of harm there. Not with strong acid and alkali agents like cleaners or chemicals, and not with petroleum products. All right, so more fun, uplifting topics. We have diarrhea. We don't have diarrhea, but somebody might. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. One sort of folk remedy that I have used and seen work nicely is blackberry root. Okay? Blackberry root. So yeah, maybe you could use the berries, maybe you could use the leaves, but the root is super, super, super astringent. And then you really only need like 5-10 drops of a tincture or small amounts of infusion. Do be aware that this can have a constipating effect if used in excess. So the idea behind this blackberry root is really just to help reduce excess water loss, to try to prevent dehydration. And it's not necessarily getting at the cause, if it is a sort of a bacterial or infectious cause. So you might also use some GI antimicrobials like golden seal. This is a great antiviral, antimicrobial, mucosal membrane tonic. Of course, controversial ecologically. So keep sourcing in mind. Or again, you want to use the plants that are going to actually work if we're going to use plant-based medicine. So if you happen to have some golden seal and someone has in some real trouble, that could be the time to use it. Oregon grapefruit is a close second, chemically quite similar, of course. 1 to 3 mils of either several times a day at least, perhaps a little bit more often, actually. And I have pictured these sort of brilliant yellow roots of each of these plants. Altitude sickness. So, result of a difference in available oxygen at different altitudes or at higher altitudes. There are secondary effects of increased respiration. You're breathing more frequently, more heavily, and that can result in dehydration. Sometimes a person will experience shortness of breath. Some will have nausea or fatigue or feel hungover. Actually, some people will feel none of these, but have cognitive impairment, such as slurred or slowed speech. So these are some things to look out for if altitude difference is relevant. So the conventional wilderness first aid wisdom is to rest, ascend slowly or descend, keep hydrated, have another person monitor them. Sometimes supplemental oxygen could be needed, but there are some herbal approaches as well, which are not to replace any of those, but some things that people have used for ages, particular people who live in or travel to higher altitudes. Ginkgo has been shown, I wrote proven, but let's say shown to protect some against some of the effects of altitude sickness. And we do know that one of ginkgo's sort of star qualities is supporting circulation to the head and brain. So there we go. OSHA is also said to improve breathing, and has long traditional use for adjusting to higher altitudes. Chewing the root, candied, is not a bad way to experience it. We have some doses. For ginkgo, some say 80 milligrams per 12 hours, starting 24 hours before. You can start before you ascend, that's even better. Some recommend chewing on plain or candied OSHA root during ascent. Rhodiola is another one of these plants that grows at high altitudes and has been used in this way. And that is generally thought to be energizing, generally thought to be good for someone with sort of brain fog or constitution that maybe their circulation to their head and brain isn't always, super stellar. And so this is yet another possibility. The root is the part used. You might be using tinctures or capsules. It's also a fairly well-known adaptogenic plant. All right, so how about some more exciting scenarios? I see I'm on the very last slide, and I know I've talked a really long time. I think I'm going to suggest that I might do a part 2. So with that, because I'm not sure quite how long I've gone here, I'm going to stop here, but I will suggest some of the more exciting scenarios. More exciting scenarios include venomous snake and spider bites, stress and freaked out victims and bystanders and caregivers, acidic or caustic substances on the skin, eyes, mouth, and throat. We actually have some herbal as well as home remedy things we can do for those. Dislocations, have some herbs in mind, and herbs I have actually used. Not to just magically put something back into location, but to kind of relax the muscles around that site. Withdrawal, someone's wired and tired, someone has weird rashes and hives. These are all things that we might be able to help with a little bit as herbalists. So I think now I've committed to doing a part 2 somewhere down the road, but we will, for now, stop here.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.